ahead and get going. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Happy to be here with you today. Today, as the user adoption keynote, we're really going to talk about the pitfalls and challenges that many of us face when we're trying to drive adoption of Microsoft 365, SharePoint Online, or any of these other great collaboration tools. So many of us have tried to start adoption campaigns in the past, and we may have had them fizzle out due to a lack of interest. Today, we're really going to look at the cultural and strategic challenges that many of us face as we're trying to launch these types of programs, and explain why cookie cutter programs don't tend to work, meaning that things that work great at one company in terms of driving adoption may not work well at another company. So that's what we're going to focus on for the time that we have today. As an introduction, for all of you, let me introduce myself. There we go. My name is Sarah Haase. I'm an enterprise librarian, product manager, and collaboration evangelist. I'm also an Office Apps and Services MVP. I tend to work for very large organizations, helping them drive adoption of Microsoft 365, SharePoint, and other capabilities in that way. I'm also on the Microsoft 365 Voice podcast, help organize another little SharePoint Saturday event, and you can find all of my relevant information there and how to reach out to me. But enough about that. Let's get into the agenda of what we're going to be talking about for the next hour. So really, we're going to boil it down to 4 key areas. We're going to first start talking about the context of the challenge that we all face. Then we're going to talk about why we can't boil user adoption down to a simple recipe with a 5-step plan to success. Then we're going to start taking a look at really important things, including your company culture and how that should drive and dictate what you do in the strategy that you take as you move forward on building your user adoption plan. And we're going to wrap up the session today with giving you practical steps on how you can build a user adoption strategy. I like to call it a user adoption continuum that you can put in place at your organization to drive that adoption that you're looking for. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in to the first area. And this is really the acknowledgement that we've all got problems when it comes to user adoption. We have technology that can meet our users' needs and can help them achieve and fulfill their business goals, but it's an uphill battle to get their attention and to have them get it and get excited about the tools and technologies that we have. So how do we proceed with getting them excited about all of the capabilities that Microsoft 365 has to offer? And how do we help them to get knowledgeable about those tools and technologies to be able to really make a difference and to be able to use them effectively, to be able to help them meet their business goals more cleanly, quickly, and easily? So this is really where we're going to start today. And I think we have to start by recognizing that the path to user adoption of SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, any of these capabilities, certainly Yammer, and all of Microsoft 365, your plan might seem straightforward and direct, but the reality to get there is that you're going to have hills to climb, moats to slog through. It's going to be arduous, it's going to be difficult, and it's not going to be a direct path. It can be circuitous. It can be meaning doubling back and trying something else because that totally didn't work. And I think we have to realize that we're in it for the long haul, and we have to not let ourselves get bogged down in those feelings of despair that we're not making a difference, but we have to continually try and iterate and change course as we learn more about our organization, our users, and how we can reach them effectively to talk about the challenges that we have. So here's the reality for all of us, is that unfortunately technology adoption is a wicked problem. The term wicked problem was actually coined by Horst Riddle in the 1960s, and wicked problems were used to describe the social planning challenges that couldn't be solved via normal means. So these are the world problems like global hunger, social injustices, obviously in 2020, the COVID crisis. And these problems we can't solve via the traditional means that we go after it. And in recent years, I would say in the last decade, we've really expanded this idea of wicked problems into the technology sector, and specifically around knowledge management, collaboration, and these types of large-scale enterprise systems, that we face a wicked problem with getting them off the ground, with getting our users to be engaged in a fulfilling way in using these, and to be able to have them help us achieve the IT direction and the business direction that we want to. So one of my favorite people in the overall SharePoint and Microsoft community is Paul Comsey. He's actually a consultant out of Australia. And he says the commonality between this classic idea of a wicked problem and SharePoint or Microsoft 365 challenges is the social challenge of driving an unending series of changes across population groups without any guideposts or verification that those measures are taking hold. And if we think about it, how hard is it when we're constantly pushing technology to our users? We're constantly trying to educate them about technology that is moving as quickly as Microsoft 365 does, with new features coming out all the time, new apps, new capabilities. And we don't have the ability to quickly and easily see always what kind of saturation we're getting. How is our message being received? Yes, if we're doing communications on Yammer, we can track engagement, we can track likes, we can track comments. We certainly have some amount of analytics that Microsoft provides us in terms of how many people are engaged in Outlook every day, how many people are actively using OneDrive on a monthly basis. But that doesn't necessarily speak to the user adoption, and is the message actually resonating with users? Are they using the technology and the tools because they're forced to, or because they find a value in it? That value proposition of where they find enrichment in using the tools is where true adoption lives. It's where the user excitement lives, and it's where they'll be able to get excited and enthused enough about the tool set to be able to pay it forward towards other people and their organization, and to help educate and promote other people. And that's really the hard part, because oftentimes that might be transparent to us. We are pushing, but we don't have quick and easy access to be able to get that feedback loop from our users to let us know that we have that verification that our measures are successful. So this is really the challenge that we all face today. And next, we're going to take a look at why is it that user adoption can't be boiled down to some game of Simon Says. And I get asked this all the time. People are constantly looking for what user adoption tips or tricks can I take back to use in my organization. And the reality is user adoption isn't a copycat story. You can't memorize a specific series of steps, perform them in a prescribed manner, and somehow be successful. And there's no 10-step program to build Microsoft 365 enthusiasm within your organization, because the reality is that all of our organizations are different and unique. And the challenges that they have in growing adoption are all different and unique. So we have to find that just right fit for our company. And we can't simply take a great idea from one organization and simply drop it into ours in the hopes that it works. Now, here's a specific example of what I mean by that. Many of you may remember this from back in 2011. JCPenney actually hired a new CEO. They hired CEO Ron Johnson away from Apple. Now, Ron Johnson had spent 10 years at Apple building out one of the most creative and successful retail store chains in the country with all of the Apple stores that they had had, and incredibly successful. And JCPenney was looking to go through their own creative transformation process. They wanted to redefine their retail space. They wanted to redefine the look and feel of their stores. They wanted to refresh really that dowdy image, or the older image that they had, and raise the profit margin. So they hired Ron Johnson, thinking that he could drive the same type of transformational change at JCPenney that he did at Apple, and really have these store within a store concepts, opening up blue jean bars within JCPenney stores, and having that kind of design thinking. And unfortunately for JCPenney, the grand idea completely backfired. Design thinking and radical retail transformation may have been core to Apple's brand, but it wasn't core to JCPenney's previous brand. And in fact, they were trying to really build out JCPenney stores into being an entirely different kind of store with an entirely different kind of customer than they had previously had. Now, Ron Johnson kept the faith and kept on pushing them towards creating this new retail transformation model quarter after quarter after quarter, while JCPenney was losing money. And the company really stayed within that vein for quite a few years, until finally in 2013, 2 years into the journey, JCPenney fired Johnson because the stock had plunged, their customers were bailing, and what they really found is that the Ron Johnson plan for Apple didn't translate into JCPenney. Now, why is that? Because JCPenney isn't Apple. JCPenney's customers aren't Apple's customers. So you can't simply take something that works great at one organization, drop it into another, and hope that things will be successful. So situational context is key. The best ideas in the field or the best ideas implemented at another company can still be a poor fit for your organization. Ron Johnson might have been a great hire for many companies. He might have been able to reestablish and reinvigorate the retail brand at many companies, but it wasn't the right fit to be able to make JCPenney's profitable with the model that was being done. And that mismatch of context is so important. And it's the first and primary thing you need to understand about driving user adoption in your organization for Microsoft 365, is that what really matters is the situational context of your organization, what your users want and need, and how we can deliver that to them in a way that will be the most meaningful for them. So here's the bottom line. And again, Paul Comsey quote, I love this quote. He says, depending on the conditions, something that works for one organization may completely suck for another, thereby invalidating this whole notion of an arbitrary best practice. It's really important to think about that just because an idea works well at one company doesn't mean it will work well for yours. In fact, it could actually go work against you, backfire, and you could lose more than you had started with from an opportunity gain perspective. So it's so important that we think about and start with analyzing our organizations and our organizational needs. And then from there, we start to build out that user adoption plan. So with that, now that we've set up the overall strategy, let's dive in and start taking a look at the importance that culture plays and how we build the user adoption plans for our organization. So every company, every team, and every situation is unique. While we all share some of the same common challenges and issues, we have to determine which strategies and options are going to be a just right fit for our department and our company. So once again, don't implement that one size fits most strategy. We need to identify the culture of your organization so that you can build a user adoption strategy that is able to meet that. Now, here's an example of what I mean, and I'm going to give you two extreme examples on either end of the continuum. If you work for an innovative think tank that prides itself on cutting edge technology, you need a user adoption plan that really stresses the innovation and employee enablement. Meaning, if I work for a think tank innovative company, Microsoft 365 self-service, for example, is going to be very important to my users. What do I mean by that? Enabling all of them to spin up a new Microsoft team, a new Yammer community, a new SharePoint Online site, a new planner plan, to spin up all of those elements on demand as the need arises is going to be very important for a company like that. Far more important that they can get it in their hands immediately and start working on it than to be able to have any kind of governance process that requires time and approvals before those new teams, plans, sites, et cetera, can be created. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're working for an organization that has a high degree of technical debt, a user base that is averse to change, or you're in a highly regulated industry where due to regulatory or compliance needs, you have to have audit records for every SharePoint site that you create, for every team. They all have to be tagged using data classification to be able to determine, for example, whether they contain personal information, sensitive information, et cetera, you're going to need to put more rigor around that process. So you might need to actually go through an approval mechanism to have new teams or Yammer communities or SharePoint sites created, or require some type of a registration process for your employees to go through. So it's really important to understand what defines your organization, how your users think and work, and certainly what regulatory, fiscal, compliance, and governance principles that you have to base your user adoption strategy on before you get started. So with that, I want to walk through a few key things that I think are important questions to ask yourself to define this culture in your organization and to help you define the main precepts or pillars on which you're going to build out your user adoption strategy. So let's take a look at that for a moment. First, I think you need to consider who do you have on your implementation team that is helping you drive all of this movement towards Microsoft 365. Who owns the strategy? Is it IT? Is it the business? How are they pushing forward with that strategy? And how closely aligned are they to understanding the business needs? Now, many of us have seen before that an IT strategy that looks great to the IT department may not look good to the business departments. They may feel underserved. They may feel unheard about where that is going. So we need to make sure that we understand who owns the strategy for our organization and why do they own that strategy, and make sure that that strategy resonates across the company. Do you have the right skill sets in place in terms of your implementation team? Who's going to support Microsoft 365? Do you have the right skills? Do you have people? Meaning, do you have people that are great at building connections, providing great customer service, getting people excited about the platform? I also ask if you have tumblers in place. And tumbler is an interesting word. It actually is a Yiddish word that means to move about. And your tumblers are those people that are excited about Microsoft 365 and that really have the capability of getting your users excited about Microsoft 365 as well. And you need those tumblers to drive adoption because those are the charismatic people that are going to bring people in, whether that is bringing them into user groups, bringing them into training classes, getting them to communicate and share on Yammer. These are the people that are going to engage the audience, whether that is in a geographically disparate way or coming together in the office. Community organizers are also very important and are key to driving success. At the end of the day, we are people who listen to other people. Having people who are key influencers in our departments and in our teams, having them be supportive of your Microsoft 365 adoption initiative, having them caught up in what you're doing and excited and enthusiastic will make all of the difference in your plan moving forward. So even if those people are not on your implementation team, how can you engage them? How can you leverage them? How can you make sure that you're utilizing them to help you push forward your model of success? And then you want to make sure that you're starting out with the right mix of personalities and talents. I always end up leading these enterprise teams that focus on these collaboration tools. And I love having a team that has people from a wide variety of backgrounds with a wide variety of skills because it enables us to cover so much more ground and to be more effective. All right, leadership, so incredibly important. Do your executives understand what you're trying to achieve with Microsoft 365 adoption? Do they support it? And most importantly, do they view user adoption as an ongoing service or as a project that's part of the overall implementation plan for Microsoft 365? Now, all too often, we have senior leaders or executive sponsors that think that user adoption and training is just a part on the project implementation lifecycle rather than an ongoing service. Here's the reality. If you're driving forward any platform like Microsoft 365 or any other platform that you want to drive adoption of, you're going to have to drive that adoption from well before you start using that platform until the day that you sunset that platform and you're no longer using it in your organization. You can't take a week off, you can't take a month off, you certainly can't take a year off of driving that adoption, otherwise that user adoption will wane. So it's very important to position it as an ongoing service in your organization rather than as a one-time project or a part-time effort. That can be done. It really requires that passion and engagement on an ongoing basis. And we really have to be realistic that without that executive support for user adoption being an ongoing service, the passion projects that we have around driving adoption will never become an enterprise strategy. So it's important to consider what will happen if you're the one who's passionate about driving adoption for SharePoint or Microsoft 365. You don't have executive support behind your vision and campaign. When you win the lottery or go on to that next role or retire someday, what's going to happen to that passion project that you led? Without that executive support, without that enterprise vision, your passion project will never become an enterprise strategy. So it's important to be realistic about what you need in order to help it get to that next level. You also need to take a close look at your users and what is driving them and how to engage them. Are your users overwhelmed by technical jargon? How technically mature is your user base? Can they easily acclimate to changing features and things moving in OneDrive from week to week, and things shifting in SharePoint Online or new features dropping? Are they disenfranchised due to previous bad experiences with IT programs or with tool sets that they were promised would be groundbreaking to meet their needs, but then they really don't? Have they been voluntold? And this is infamous. I've worked at so many organizations and with so many people who said, we created a user adoption program and we selected everyone in our organization who was of a certain job grade level, or we asked every leader to push forward one person who would be one of our champions for rolling out a new collaboration capability. If those users are voluntold, you're going to get a far different level of engagement from them than if they volunteer and are passionate about what they're doing. So you have to take a look at voluntolding them means that you are putting someone forward who hasn't volunteered, they haven't come forward. This is just one more thing that they're given as part of their job. Do they resent the imposition? Do they have time or any passion around what you're asking them to help you achieve? It's really important that you take a look and don't set unrealistic expectations for people being passionate for something which they never indicated that they had a passion for in the first place. So we just need to be realistic about what that looks like. Personally, I always strive to have volunteers to be user adoption and agents of change or champions within my organizations rather than voluntold. I don't like the model of having one person selected from every department, because what you end up with is a very small percentage of those people that are identified that are actually willing to engage and willing to actually lean into that process and that effort. So at the end of the day, you also need to think about that your user adoption strategy has to be inspired by and designed for your users. It cannot be designed for you, for your IT organization, or whoever owns the initiative. It has to be rooted in what your organizational and what your end users need. We also need to think about the feel of our company, make sure that we're aligning our user adoption program, the terminology we use, the marketing that we use around Microsoft 365 and those tools to meet our company objectives. So how do I start this? I love asking people, what 3 words would you use to describe your company? And ask a variety of employees that question. You'll be fascinated at the kinds of things that come forward when you ask them to describe their company in 3 words. Sometimes you might hear people say it's innovative, it's the best place to work, but you might also hear that it's toxic, or it's non-trusting, or it is backwards from a technology perspective. And all of those kinds of descriptors are very important, because that is the frame of reference context that your users are using to judge anything new that they hear about that comes down the technology pipeline. So you want to make sure that your user adoption strategy is rooted in an understanding of how people feel about the company, how people feel about technology initiatives, so you acknowledge that and build on it, and make sure that your user adoption strategy matches that. So at the end of the day, a study in company personality, cultural norms, and company nomenclature is really going to help you to be able to position your user adoption strategy in a way that works effectively. And we're going to talk more about that nomenclature and how you name things in just a couple of minutes. Outcome. What's your user adoption vision? So what are you trying to achieve, and how are you trying to get there? This is an incredibly important part of the overall story. What problem are you trying to solve? Oftentimes, I think that we find a great tool and then are in search of a solution to use it for. And this isn't a problem of we have a hammer and we need to find something to use it, or something that we can use to persuade other things with our hammer. We really need to determine what is it that we're trying to solve, where is it that we're trying to go, and that we approach things from that perspective. We also need to really not get ahead of ourselves. You cannot focus on 400 level initiatives if you don't have 100 level outcomes. What do I mean by that? You don't stop learning. You don't start with math by learning trigonometry. You start with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So we need to make sure that we are, while we might be the most excited about trigonometry and where we're going at the 400 level user adoption initiative stage, and we're going to talk more about that, we have to make sure that we have a good foundation, that we have a basic understanding, and that we have all the core things in place that we need to be able to drive that adoption story. And then make sure that you take time to build your strategy that reflects both where you are today and where you're going, and realizing this could be a multi-year project. This could be a multi-year vision. It often is not a quick. The thing about user adoption, it is rarely fast. It is rarely simple and rarely easy. So you need to be in it for the long haul and plan sufficiently for that. Okay, so that's all of our food for thought session. So now we're really going to get into the practicalities of things. We understand that we've got some problems around adoption. We understand we can't simply do a copycat methodology, taking some great user adoption ideas from elsewhere and drop them into our company. We now know that we have to look at our organization and at our culture. So now it's time to actually get started with building a user adoption strategy for our organizations. And I'm actually going to go through and teach you how I like to build these strategies for all of the organizations that I work with. And I'm actually going to show you a couple of examples from specific organizations and things that they did on their path to getting that adoption that they wanted. So here is the user adoption continuum that we're going to be covering today. And I put it in here as a high-level picture, and all of the slides are available for you in the sessions channel. So you can certainly find all of these slides if you'd like to borrow this graphic. But let's break down what I have here. I've broken down user adoption into 3 stages. There's nothing key about my 3 stages. You could break it down into more stages if you so desired. But I focus on formation, adoption, and maturation. The formation stage of user adoption is really laying the building blocks for your adoption strategies. So that's absolutely building a firm, flat layer and foundation that then you can build your user adoption strategy on. Your adoption phase is really where you're mainstreaming or mainlining your user adoption efforts. You're starting to pick up speed, you're getting more and more people engaged, and you're really hitting a mature stride in terms of making sure that you have that ongoing user adoption engagement. In the maturation phase, you're now ready for those highly mature programs or initiatives that are designed for a company that's already achieving success in the adoption space. These are those 400 level initiatives. I think of this as the fun stage. You finally get to go after some of those really cool, groundbreaking, innovative ideas. But being in the maturation stage first requires you to have already done your formation work and already achieved that mainline adoption that you need. So I recommend building out a continuum like this. Now you're going to notice that I have high-level bullet points in this continuum. This isn't meant to be a detailed model. This is your executive abstract for where you're going and what you're going to do. Underneath each of these bullets is going to be detailed planning on how you're going to achieve each of the core pillar items within your formation, adoption, and maturation stage. So let's go ahead and take a look at this user adoption continuum for one of the organizations that I worked with. I'm going to call them Company A. And you can see that I have a bunch of bullets in here for formation, adoption, and maturation. Now, this particular company was rebooting their governance and user adoption programs for a really large SharePoint implementation. When I worked with this company, it was actually in 2013. They were launching SharePoint 2013 on-prem. The lovely part about this is that you're still going to find pieces and parts of this that might still resonate with your organization, because it isn't really about the version of the technology, but the path they took to build their user adoption strategy that's important. So the company opted to invest heavily in education and community growth programs with the goal of increasing overall usage of SharePoint collaboration and business automation features. So if we take a look at the formation stage, we really started with a deployment of a very large SharePoint 2013 on-prem instance. We, for the first time, launched formalized governance around SharePoint. So it was really the first version of SharePoint at that company that had any type of governance programs associated with it. For the first time, we had help desk support for SharePoint that was effective, so people could call the help desk when they had SharePoint questions or issues and get that help. We also had one-on-one coaching, and I'm going to show you some examples of ROI case studies in a moment. Those were all our formation pieces. Again, we're going to go into more details on some of these bullets. In the adoption phase, we launched an internal user group, and then we built our own custom training program and held sessions that are called lightning rounds. I'll be telling you more about that in just a moment. And then in the maturation phase, we actually launched a SharePoint Ninja program and held hackathon education events. So let's dive in and cover a little bit more in detail what led to this. So underlying this entire user adoption strategy, this company invested in building a center of excellence around collaboration adoption and collaboration support. The center of excellence can be incredibly important. Some people have a natural negative reaction to the term center of excellence. I don't really care what you call it, but it's really a team that's dedicated to uplifting the user adoption and use of collaboration tools or Microsoft 365 or SharePoint within your organization. It can be a team that reports in through a specific department like HR, corporate communications, or IT, or it can be a consortium group of users from across the organization that have a common purpose and a plan. Again, doesn't really matter what you call it, but this link up here will actually take you to the best session that I've ever seen around Center of Excellence. It was actually from the 2012 SharePoint conference, And a friend of mine, Andrew Woodward, delivered this session, and it's really about 45 minutes on how to build a center of excellence. So if you're unsure of what that is, you're unsure of how to build a core team that can help you achieve user adoption success with collaboration tools like Microsoft 365, definitely recommend checking that out. Now, in the formation stage for this company, case studies were really important. This is an example of one of the many, many case studies that we built for the organization. Now, case studies, when I talk about them, are really one slide executive abstract views into a successful story, project, or initiative. In this case, something that we built on SharePoint that provided value to the business. Now, many of the business users that we may work with to implement solutions like these couldn't necessarily or would not have the time to create these kind of case study summaries. So our Center of Excellence team worked with and partnered with, but ultimately wrote the words down to create these case studies. They worked with business teams to identify what all of the solutions were to help build the solutions, but then we took on the documentation of the case studies themselves. The format of the case studies that I like to use, I tend to create them in PowerPoint, not because I love PowerPoint, but my executives at every company I've ever worked with love PowerPoint. My joke is that if my executives love napkins, I'll write it on napkins. If they start loving Sway, I'll write it in Sway. I don't really care where we put it. I just try and put it in a format that they natively appreciate and like. So I broke down every case study as just a single PowerPoint slide. I like using PowerPoint and putting all of the notes to the PowerPoint slide, which is all the detail that goes below all of these high-level bullets. But I like to summarize the business need that was met, the solution that was built, and the high-level benefits. The hardest part of writing something like this is being able to translate a complex business process into a high level of the executive abstract summary of the business need that anyone in the company could understand. It's the hardest part about writing one of these. But as you can see in this particular case, this case study summarized an initiative to be able to build an issue tracking solution that would help people. They were using multiple versions of a single Excel spreadsheet to submit, track, and assign issues. We moved that data online to SharePoint, to a SharePoint list, and built an automated work queue so that when team members logged into SharePoint, they would see issues that were open that were assigned to them and could literally work their queue to zero every single week. The benefits all came from the business line teams. So our implementation team who may have built the SharePoint solution didn't come up with these benefits. The actual business users did. In this case, we were able to save time compiling and sharing multiple spreadsheets. Everyone was able to add and view issues simultaneously because they were all working off of one list in SharePoint rather than different Excel spreadsheets. There's no more duplicate reporting of issues. We saved them all that time copying and pasting data between multiple spreadsheets. And at the end of the day, we ended up saving the company a total of $135,000 a year using this particular solution. Now, how I came up with that dollar value is a whole different session on ROI. That is not what we're talking about today. But I provide this as an example of what a case study could be. Now, what did we do with these case studies? We actually built a document library in SharePoint, stored all of these case studies in that document library, and I used filtered metadata columns so that I could easily pull up every case study from this fiscal year. I could pull up case studies based on which business line team I built it for. So if I built it for HR, I could pull up all of the relevant case studies for HR, for IT, for the legal division, for any division in the company. And then I also put in the dollar amount so that I could have some ability to sum the total investment in dollar savings that we provided from an organizational perspective. I then shared this document library with all of my leadership team. So they had access. So if they were ever in a meeting and somebody asked them, how do we justify the expense that we're spending on Microsoft 365 or SharePoint? They had a document library available to them where they could pull up case study summaries like this one and said, I can show you what value that we're actually providing from the platform. I can show you the level of engagement, and they had this available at their fingertips at any point in time should they need it. So that's that case study, definitely part of the formation stage of that company to be able to really help build a solid foundation for how the collaboration platforms were being used. We also hosted something called lightning rounds. Lightning rounds have been popular. I've used them with multiple different customers and companies that I've worked with. They're a series of short demos that are done rapid fire in a show and tell session as part for your internal users. I tend to like doing them as part of user group events, but you could host a special one-time event to have this kind of lightning round show and tell demo. Here's the key point. These show and tell demos are not done by our enterprise Microsoft 365 team. They're from people around the business who have built solutions that utilize Yammer, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, Power Apps, Power Automate. They've built solutions that use these Microsoft 365 capabilities, and we line up several of them to come in and do literally 8 to 10 minute segments where they talk about what their business need was, do a quick demo, and then answer questions about why they built what they built or answer user questions. The great thing about this is it can be done in person. It can also be done virtually, since many of us are working from home today. What value does this get you? From a community perspective, there's nothing more powerful for an end user in your organization than seeing another end user who has built a successful solution. So if they can see that John Doe built a successful solution with Teams, it's going to mean so much more than sitting in a Microsoft Teams class talking about Teams features. So it really enables people to highlight those that have done a great job of building solutions, but it also enables them to see examples of success from across the company. So my users love these. They're also a great way if you run a user group in your organization. I know month over month, those user groups can be hard to come up with new topics. The great thing about these lightning rounds is you don't get to take a month off, but you don't have to present. Instead, you're coordinating having people from your community within your organization come and present about what they have done in this lightning round style. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the maturation phase, and I'm actually going to go back. And if I go back to the slide that we had for Company Way, we've talked about the ROI case studies. We talked about the lightning rounds in the adoption stage. I now want to talk about both the SharePoint Ninja program in the maturation phase, as well as the hackathons that we used to run, because people are usually very interested in these types of things. So we launched a program called the SharePoint Ninjas program, and that program was meant to be able to highlight, recognize individuals within our organization who are great evangelists for SharePoint from an organizational perspective. I'm going to give you an overview of the program. If you'd like to hear more about it, this link will take you to a recording where you can hear in much more detail about the training program that we built and all about the SharePoint Ninja program. But let me go ahead and introduce it to you now and give you some ideas of what it was for. So a SharePoint Ninja in this organization was responsible for building effective SharePoint sites and evangelizing collaboration tools in general. They were great teachers, meaning that they were willing to share what they know. They were not hoarders of that information. They were walking, talking, really great evangelist advertisements for the collaboration tools and what they could do. They also supported our enterprise vision and strategy, meaning they supported our governance efforts for where they were going. So they were part of the tribe that really wanted to help the company move forward with utilizing, in this case, SharePoint. But you could have the same type of Ninja program or recognition program for Microsoft Teams champions or any other capabilities within the Microsoft 365 stack. Now, the most important thing is that these SharePoint Ninjas were embedded within business level teams, meaning we had ninjas in the legal department, we had ninjas in HR, in corporate communications, in IT, we had them all across the company. And what was really great about that is that they were local, meaning that they were able to connect with users in their different areas. And that meant that we were able to multiply our ability to be influential and to attract people into using SharePoint, in this case, across the company by having local representatives that were really strong evangelists and that were recognized for the good that they did. Now, I should say that this Ninja program was an approved HR recognition program. We ran it through IT, but it was HR approved, and it was really meant to be a career level recognition of an award, if you will, for great service that was done from a company perspective. We had 4 levels of SharePoint Ninjas at the organization. We had baby ninjas, we called them sapphire ninjas. Then we had Emerald Ninjas, Ruby Ninjas, and Shadow Eye Ninjas. So those were 4 different levels. Why did we have different levels? Because we wanted to give, some people just wanted to achieve that recognition status of being a SharePoint Ninja. and they were going to be happy. Other people wanted to continue the growth. They wanted to continue to get stronger in the platform. They wanted to continue to give back. And so building in 4 levels gave them a growth opportunity. It gave them a growth curve, which helped to keep many of them excited and engaged in the program and continuing to learn. So that was why we built the 4 levels. How did we come up with the name of the levels? We actually Googled the term ninja, and this is one of the things that came back in terms of levels of ninjas that you could have, so we implemented it. In order to achieve that ninja recognition, people could not apply to be a ninja. It was a recognition or an award. So we had an online submission form where people could say, hey, could you please consider me to be a SharePoint ninja? Not an application form, it was a submission form, because again, this was a recognition. But in order to recognize someone as a ninja, that first level ninja, that Sapphire ninja, they needed to have at least 5 areas or feature functionality areas within SharePoint that they had mastery of. What's a feature functionality area? We actually came up with around 47 of them. For example, things like UI design and layout, site collection management, metadata, permissions, content types, web parts, information management policies. At the time, of course, we were using InfoPath, so we had InfoPath in there, building out of the box workflows and custom workflows, dashboards, all of that kind of thing. So we listed off every feature that we could think of within the SharePoint 2013 space. And in order to be considered and to be able to get that initial Ninja Sapphire level, baby ninja status, they had to have 5 areas of mastery. What do I mean by mastery? It means that they could take someone off the street who had never heard of SharePoint in their life and be able to teach them about that capability set. Now, what was amazing about this is that the most often cited area of expertise and mastery that we had when people were submitting for consideration to be a ninja, almost everyone said that they were an expert at permissions. And here's what we asked them to do. We asked them to send us the URL for a couple of SharePoint sites that would show off some of their SharePoint skills. We would actually go in and look at that SharePoint site, and if we found that those people were not using Active Directory groups, security groups, even SharePoint groups to grant permissions, but instead we're granting permissions at the individual user level without having any documentation around how they were managing that permissions, we didn't necessarily find them to be an expert in that area. So they may have listed out multiple areas of expertise. We may or may not have agreed with all of those areas. But at the end of the day, you only needed 5 areas of mastery to get recognized as a level 1 Sapphire Ninja. But in order to go above that first level to any of our other levels, you needed to have community engagement. What did that mean? You had to be willing to give back to your community. So you had to be willing and able to help host internal office hours, attend user group meetings, present at a lightning session, answer user questions on the wiki that we had, write blog posts that could help people with figuring out how to use SharePoint. It didn't really matter what they did, but they had to do something to pay it forward, to share what they knew with others. They could have mentored another SharePoint site owner or site collection administrator. So again, it didn't matter what they did, but they had to have that ongoing level of community engagement. Didn't matter how many areas of mastery that they had. They always started at that level 1 status and then had to move up from there in terms of where they were going. All right. So next, I want to talk about, that's a really quick overview of the SharePoint Ninja program. You can certainly learn more about it by going out and visiting that URL. We also ran hackathon events. These hackathon events were 2-day educational intensive deep dive events where we coordinated teams of people that wanted the experience, and these are people from across the company who would come together and work on teams to be able to solve a common challenge. So it kicked off in the morning, all of the teams would come together and they would all receive an envelope and they would all be given the same challenge. They would only receive it on the day of the event that they had to build out, for example, a project SharePoint site template for the organization that met these requirements. They were given, we gave them 24 hours to complete that objective and to complete that vision. And then on the second day, they would come in and present what they had built to our internal user group, and then we would have a judging panel and we would be able to see what feedback that people had, and ultimately one team would become the victor. And it was a great immersive education experience. Very cost effective, very cheap to run. We literally only spent, I think, a couple $100 the first time that we ran it to buy pizza and donuts. But a very inexpensive event to run, a very immersive hands-on education event for the users, ended up being very popular. Again, that was in that maturation phase of our user adoption continuum. Now, one thing I want to call out about Company A in this entire user adoption continuum, you have to make sure that you're keeping in mind your culture. I get asked all the time because a lot of people have heard of these hackathon events or the SharePoint Ninja programs, and they say, are you going to run those same events or create SharePoint Ninjas with other companies that you work with? And here's the thing, we need to make sure that we're paying attention to the words that we use. I work in the financial and banking industry now. I'm not running a hackathon of anything because that terminology simply wouldn't go with the companies that I am now working with. At the time when I was working with this company, the idea of a ninja, the idea of a hackathon really fit their company culture, their dynamic, and the way that they express themselves and the internal nomenclature that they use to refer to things. Doesn't mean that I couldn't also run an immersive education event, but I wouldn't call it a hackathon if I'm working in a highly secure industry, simply because that brings up a whole lot of negative connotations. So again, it's important to think about the culture of where you're working. Make sure that you're actually designing structures and events that are doing the right thing and that can help you achieve your goals. The only other thing that I'll talk about briefly as well, you've got to make sure that you're not doing those maturation items too soon in your process. The SharePoint Ninja program and these hackathon events were incredibly fun events to run, but they took a lot of juice, if you will, to be able to succeed. I couldn't have effectively had a SharePoint Ninja program without having a solid community internally to be able to recognize those ninjas. I certainly couldn't have run hackathon events without having a community to help support and to be able to have people volunteer to serve on those hackathon teams. So I needed to do all of that formation and adoption work first in order to build the effective foundation for me to be able to launch these cool maturation programs of the SharePoint Ninjas and to be able to go through and launch things like these hackathon events. All right, so now let's look at a different company example, another company that I worked with. We're using the same user adoption continuum, but you're going to see how it might look different at different companies. So company B, from a formation perspective, I started out by holding something called innovation game sessions, and I'm going to introduce that in just a moment. I also had a lot of coffee with a lot of different users from across the company and the organization to be able to share with them and to learn from them what their experience was. I built a lot more ROI case studies. In this case, this company had extremely structured and strenuous governance policies that were really getting in the way of user adoption. We had to really simplify those governance process without necessarily getting rid of the required rigor. We had to streamline how long they took. So it didn't take, for example, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get a new Microsoft team. They were able to streamline that process down to be in under a business day, for example. So we had to do that as well. From an adoption perspective, we of course launched training because they didn't have that. That's something that they needed. We launched a user group. We launched an internal community education site built on SharePoint, of course, that we called the Collab Hub. And we deployed something called a SharePoint Showcase is what we called it. But it was really an example site where people could see great SharePoint or Microsoft 365 solutions that they could look at. So let's start off talking a little bit about innovation games. I'm a big practitioner and advocate for innovation games, which are a means of applying gaming mechanics to some of our collaborative challenges that can really help us to find new ways to solve some of those wicked problems that we have around collaboration. So they're a set of facilitated exercise or games that you can play with your customers, your peers, or your internal teams to be able to build shared understanding, solve work problems, come up with creative ideas for being able to solve issues, those kinds of things. There are many, many different types of games. Each one has a different outcome that they're trying to do. Some of them can help you uncover an unmet market need within your company or with your customers, helping you drive product or service usage or help you build your strategy. If you'd like more information on innovation games, you can certainly check out that URL. Some of the things that these innovation games can help you do is all of the things that I've listed here and many more. It can help you prioritize, for example, where to focus your effort from a Microsoft 365 perspective, identify areas for improvement, drive your product roadmap, all of these kinds of things. Here are a couple of picture examples of innovation games. This one is a speedboat innovation game where we used it to identify common challenges and opportunities that our users faced when it came to SharePoint and Microsoft 365. So this was an hour-long discussion where we actually went through and did not only identification of those challenges and opportunities, but ranking of them so that we actually had some artifacts to take back after. Here's another example of one where we actually had people identify and build an internal network by being able to identify the type of user that they are and how they might be connected to other users in the organization, which is a great way to help them meet one another. So innovation games were an important part for this company of helping us to understand the problem statement, helping us to understand the culture, helping us to understand what was holding them back from user adoption success and be able to achieve more. Another critical element in the adoption stage for this particular company was hosting an internal user group. So we started up a user group that met one time a month for a user group meeting, but also held office hours twice a month where people could come in and ask questions on a first come, first served basis to get one-on-one help with their collaboration technology needs. And it ended up being an incredibly effective way to do this. Now, what's interesting about user groups at different companies, and it's a perfect example of this idea of culture and context driving things. At company A, I ran a user group. At that company, we ran user group events, and after about a year and a half, we were averaging about 65 attendees internally at each of our user group events. All of those attendees were in person, other than a few users who were not located in the city that we were in. They would join remotely via WebEx, for example, or being some whatever meeting technology that we were using. That was company A. Company B, we started a user group, and the very first meeting that we had 98 attendees. From there, we only went generally up. So within 6 or 8 months, we were averaging 220 attendees per user group meeting, and this company was a quarter the size of company A. So not only was it a quarter of the size, the user group attendance was much higher. Now here's what's even more interesting. We also held these meetings in person with an ability to attend remotely. We had, on average, 85 to 90% of the users would attend these meetings remotely rather than in person, and those were people who even worked out of the same building. So they didn't want to come 2 floors down to the conference room to attend the meeting. They would rather attend remotely. Now, at the end of the day, I don't care as a user adoption or a user as a user group facilitator how my users want to engage, but it's interesting to me that different companies can have such different methodologies and preferences. Again, my job as a user adoption advocate is to make sure that I am meeting the need regardless of how they want to come in. Here's a quick example of the user group attendance and how we were able to drive that growth. So we had almost 200 users attending within the first 7 months or so. So again, I want to go back before we cap things off here, and I wanted to call out again the importance of this overall user adoption continuum, being able to build this strategy for your organization. And please keep in mind that this continuum may represent years of effort. For company A, going from formation to maturation took about 6 years. For company B, going from formation to maturation took about 3 years. The length of time is really dependent on the technology needs, the user adoption needs, how much you have executive buy-in and support for where you're going. But please keep in mind that some of these things may take years to accomplish, and sometimes you may have to go through this user adoption continuum multiple times to complete that formation, adoption, and maturation stage. But this is where I would recommend that you start building out more information and more interest in where you're going. And the final thought that I want to leave you with today is that adoption is not something that can be mandated. You simply cannot require it. You can require people to fill out a Microsoft form to take vacation time. You can't require them to love it, to see the value of Microsoft 365 or the value of the technology. It isn't something that can be mandated. That true adoption, that true passion and engagement only occurs when users decide for themselves that the solution provides them with a net benefit. So that at the end of the day is really our job, is to help them to be able to see that vision and that the solution offers them with a net benefit. So it was great having you here today. Here is my information. I would certainly recommend, if you have more user adoption questions, a lot of what I talked about today is certainly covered in blog posts. You can check out my blog, certainly check out the Microsoft 365 Voice podcast. If you are interested in having all of these links sent to you, if you take out your camera app on your phone and scan the QR code that I have here and fill out the form, you'll get an automated email powered by Microsoft 365, of course, but you'll get an automated email with all of my links for LinkedIn, Twitter, my blog, podcast, etc., to make it really easy to follow along. And then thank you so much for joining us today. A really quick note to thank Veeam and all of our other track sponsors for helping us out today and to make sure that they're bringing this event to life. And then again, a really great community organization, this Children First Fund, to support them. And then please help us out by scanning this QR code to be able to give feedback on the conference event and on all of the speakers. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to have you. Again, I did post in the sessions channel in Teams. I do have the session abstract and all of the slides from today's session posted out there, so you can go out and take a look at those. Thank you. Hope to connect with you all soon. Have a great day.